Hello and a Happy New Year to you all. The word of the year for 2022 was announced recently: gaslighting. Lookups for the word on the online Webster Dictionary in 2022 increased by 1,740%. So, gaslighting is the word of the year for 2022. Gaslighting refers to a corrosive human activity whereby a deliberate and sustained attempt is made to mislead, especially for the advantage of the perpetrator. Christmas is the time of year when gaslighting goes on big time. During the festive season, we are overwhelmed by marketeers and influencers regarding Christmas. They are gaslighting us. Nearly everyone from John Lewis to even the church is at it, misleading you regarding Christmas. The biggest perpetrator of all, of course, is probably Hallmark, that famous maker of Christmas cards. Every year the gaslighters expose you to a continual downpour of an overly sentimental, fluffy, sugary, impotent Christmas story that bears little resemblance to the magnificent scandal that is the real Christmas, based upon the New Testament accounts of the Incarnation. Perhaps the most popular untruth of them all is the assertion that Jesus was born in a stable. You will see lots of nativity scenes of the Holy Family receiving guests in a stable. This is an utterly facile misrepresentation of the Gospel of Luke. A stable is never mentioned by Luke, nor is it implied by him. Furthermore, the so-called three kings of the Orient do not even make an appearance in Luke's Gospel. This is another facile misrepresentation of something that is actually part of Matthew's Gospel. In Matthew's Gospel, there are no shepherds, there are no singing hosts of angels. The Holy Family are visited only by sorcerers, or magi, from the east. A major part of Matthew's incarnation story never even makes an appearance in the Gaslighters' version of Christmas. Crucial to Matthew's incarnation story are the images of murdered toddlers and inconsolable mothers and refugees fleeing from a murderous death squad. The king at the time of Jesus' birth is a nasty piece of work called Herod. Herod is tipped off that a baby has been born in Bethlehem, and that this baby is believed by some to be the one who will become the long-awaited Messiah. Herod is under no illusions that the Messiah is some purely spiritual title. Herod knows perfectly well that if the masses start following a Messiah, they will stop bowing down to the ruling authorities. And so Herod is not going to allow any upstart infant Messiah to start fracturing the unquestioning obedience that he currently enjoys from his fearful subjects. However, unable to identify the exact baby, Herod simply dispatches a death squad to kill all the boys under the age of 2 in the village of Bethlehem. This part of Matthew's story is simple, brutal, and chilling, but it's also part of people's experience the world over. The population of Bethlehem at the time was probably no more than about 200. If 20 children had been murdered somewhere in England or some other developed Western country this week, we'd have all heard about it for sure. But if 20 children were killed in Sudan or Syria or North Korea, there is every likelihood that the news media would not have registered it as significant enough. But such stories, however widely reported, raise some tough questions about God. How can God allow such atrocities? How can God stand by and allow innocent children to be butchered and forgotten? If God is supposed to be bringing about a reign of love and peace and justice, what on earth is God doing allowing murderous tyrants like Herod to do as they please, unchecked and unpunished? Well, the authentic Christmas stories begin to respond to these kind of questions. The Gospels start and continue by challenging what we think. What do we think God should be doing? In Matthew's incarnation account, there are some very deliberate parallels between this story and the story of Moses and the Exodus from slavery in Egypt. Matthew makes this explicit by quoting the prophet saying, "Out of Egypt I have called my son." In the popular Exodus stories that every Israelite kid was raised on, the oppressor was the king of Egypt, and the one who struck down the firstborn children was God. Thus, in the Exodus story, we have the image of a God who meets violence with violence. So now, when the roles are reversed and it is the oppressive king who kills the children, our instinct is again to look for God to meet violence with violence, a celestial peacekeeper armed to the teeth to guarantee the security of the fearful people. So, right from the start, the authentic Jesus stories are giving us a new message, a message that challenges our desires for a powerful avenging God who overcomes violence by even greater violence and imposes peace with an iron fist. So, if what you are wanting is a God of extreme force who will smash the bad guys and guarantee that nothing harmful will ever reach you, well, this Messiah, Jesus, is going to disappoint you. This is not the God who Jesus makes known to us. Even the loveliest of Christians suffer the cruelties of life. Anyway, just look at Jesus himself, hunted at birth and humiliated at death. What sort of peace do we really want anyway? If you've ever travelled in a war-torn country or a heavily militarised country where there are armed soldiers constantly patrolling the streets for your protection, then you will know that their presence gives only a tenuous sort of feeling of safety. The sort of peace and security that are based on the present balance of power being tilted our way and constantly exhibited by the show of weapons on the street, that is actually, or rather not actually, the vision of harmonious peace with justice that we're all longing for. And it is not the sort of peace that God intended when he stepped into his own creation as a vulnerable newborn baby. Right at the beginning of the authentic stories, God in Jesus faces the violence and oppression of the world. He faces it in vulnerability and in humility. Jesus is identified with his brothers and sisters in suffering the brutality of the world's murderous power brokers. while he himself slips through the fingers of death on this Christmas occasion, it is only as a refugee, and it will only be a matter of time before the world's murderous power brokers catch up with him and nail him like a rat to a barn door. So, thus begins the salvation of the world. God enters the world needy and naked, hunted and humiliated, homeless and fleeing. Not really a good hallmark theme, is it? But in Jesus, God begins the real work of overcoming violence and oppression and hostility by standing before them and taking their full force in his own body, that they might no longer be reciprocated in a constant murderous cycle of what goes around comes around. Those who live in places where the death squads and lynch mobs are only held back by the even more terrifying force of the armed soldiers on every street corner, they know only too well that the peace that is so secured still leaves their lives firmly held in slavery by the fear of death. But the work of salvation has begun. It continues today on this first day of a new year. The truth of Christmas has not changed, in spite of all the efforts of the gaslighters. God, in love and solidarity, in mercy and in the abundance of grace, has come among us, flesh and blood, to unmask the violence and oppression and to bear it in his own body all the way to the cross, that we might be free and that peace might truly come.